Okay, so we've got a giant lesson here for us for Sabbath school today. The mic on? We're good?
You are good today.
Okay. Hopefully I figured out what was going on with the computer up here. So we're going to talk about some giants. So, common misconception is that the giants that are talked about in the Bible are some type of hybrid between demons and humans. Let me get that. There we go. Between demons and humans. A lot of times they call them the Nephilim. This is a word, it's in the Bible, but it just means a fellow that's a bully or a tyrant. It doesn't mean that it is an angel-human hybrid. So the idea of when you hear people talking about Nephilim, when you're looking at the Hebrew, that word just means a feller that is a bully or a tyrant. Doesn't mean hybrid. When you start seeing the hybrid is when you're looking at the Dead Sea Scrolls, and you get to the book of Enoch, and it's talking about angels intermixing with humans. Now, word of caution with the Dead Sea Scrolls, just because the Dead Sea Scrolls contain fragments of the Bible does not mean that everything in the Dead Sea Scrolls is biblical. Because the Dead Sea Scrolls were a library. If you were to go to your public library today, is everything inside of that library biblical? No. It has lots of different sources. And so the people that were doing the Dead Sea Scrolls, this was their library. They had mythology there. They had tradition stuff there. They had biblical scrolls there. It was a combination of everything. And when they were attacked, they took some of those documents. They had them in caves. Other documents got buried in the rubble. And this is what we are finding. So the idea of the Nephilim actually has been perpetuated by the Dead Sea Scrolls, but it's not a biblical concept. It is a mythological concept. Because we know that from the Bible, humans can't procreate with angels. Because in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus says, angels do not marry in heaven. It says, when we go to heaven, the priests were trying to trip him up, and he said, have you not read? When we go to heaven, we'll be like the angels, neither marry or giving in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. Luke says the same thing, but then says, for they are equal unto the angels. That's talking about the saints. So, no procreation with angels and humans. Also, in Genesis, in creation, what did God said? Each seed unto itself. Each animal procreates its form of animal. Each human will procreate a human, not a hybrid mix. All right, so what does Genesis 6 actually say? There's a lot of writing here that's really, really small, and nobody can read it unless you're looking at it like this close. But this is an example of how Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 3, so we have 1, 2, 3, and then we have verses 4, 5, 6, and 7. So a lot of times in the Hebrew, what they would do when they're starting to tell a story, they give you a brief summary. And then they'll start over again, and they'll give you more details about what was going on, the reason that this is happening in the first place. So Genesis 1 through 3 is actually a summary of the rest of Genesis 6. So 1 through 3, it's saying that men multiplied on earth, the sons of God went into the daughters of men. They had children, and God said, enough. I've had it with y'all. You have 120 years, and then you're done. Then we take a step back, and we go back in Genesis chapter 4, or verse 4 of chapter 6, and Moses starts over again and says, hey, back when there were giants on the earth in those days, and there were also giants after that, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, they had these children, which were men of old and men of renown. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great, and every thought of his heart was evil continually. And he said, I repented that I've made man, and I'm going to destroy them. So it gives additional details about why God all of a sudden, first in verses 1 through 3, God is saying, oh, these people went and got married and had kids, I'm going to kill them. Verses 4, 5, 6, and 7 explains why he got to that point. They went and they had all these children, and these children were being rotten, and every thought was evil. So 1 through 3 is a summary, then it goes back and starts over again, and then verses 4, 5, 6, and 7 explain the details. Now, why would we need to do this? Because Genesis chapter 4, people said, oh, there weren't giants before these marriages. There were giants after these marriages. Let's look at verse 4. It says, and there were giants in those days and also after that. So Moses is picking back up from the top. So we've just covered the genealogy of Adam in chapter 5. Moses summarizes what he's going to talk about, and he says, so there were giants in those days. The days that he's talking about are the generations of Adam, and also after that, so after the flood. And the sons of God went to the daughters of men and bare children to them. These became men that were mighty, of old and renowned. So when you look at these phrases in the Hebrew, the sons of God, who are they? The followers of God. Who are the daughters of men? Those who follow false religion. Because religion is referred to as a what? A woman. Whether it be the pure woman or the wicked woman, religion is referred to as a woman in the Bible. So the daughters of men would be followers of a false religion. Mighty men. When you look, it says mighty men. Also, the word is Gaborim, and it means not stature, not height, but that they were warriors. They were heroes. They were the mighty men. They were ready to go fight. All right, which were of old. This is telling when Moses is writing it. So Moses, we think of Moses as somebody says, oh, you're old as Moses. You're moving slow as Moses. You're old as Methuselah. When Moses is writing, these were old stories. This was ancient history from his point of view. It happened, 600, 1,000 years beforehand. I forget the exact number, but it's ancient. This is things that is happening before the flood. So men of old, wasn't that they were old men. It's from his perspective. This is in the past. And then men of renown, that literally means men of name or nobles. The first royalty, honorable robbers. Didn't know a robber could be honorable unless he's Robin Hood. Boasted of their wickedness. So they were proud of their wickedness. So when we're reading that verse, we can actually read it as, there were giants in the earth in those days, but when the followers of God married the unbelievers and they had families, these children became really mighty warriors and legends for all time, and they ended up becoming the first nobility. They were the first kings and royals, but they were tyrants, and they were bullies, and they were wicked. They only did evil, and they were boasting about it. And this is what Moses is telling us. This is the state of man when God said, enough, done. So Genesis 4 points out that giants existed both at that time and after the flood, or after that time. We had big giants. Does the Bible mention specific giants? Yes. All right. Are there any other giants in the Bible? Goliath's brothers. So let's look at some of the brothers of Goliath. So the sons of the giant. Some people say that they were Goliath's sons. Some people say that they were Goliath's brothers. The Bible indicates that they were his brothers. They we're given the names of 4 of the sons. We have Goliath, Saph, Lahami, Isha-Benob. The 5th brother, they didn't name him. They gave him an attribute. They said, he's really big. He's got 6 fingers on each hand, and he has 6 toes on each foot. That is a fact that pops up in stories of giants throughout the world. 6 fingers and 6 toes on each extremity there. Then one of David's nephews went out after David fought Goliath, and he killed an unnamed Egyptian who was 5 cubits tall. Now, here's the thing. A lot of people say that there was a misprint in the Bible. It didn't really mean that Goliath was 6 cubits. It was written because there was the version, the Septuagint version of the Bible says 4 cubits. The Mosaic or Masonic script says 6 cubits. If Goliath was the ultimate giant of his day, and David fought him, David's nephew comes along, and so let's say Goliath was only 4 cubits. David's nephew comes along and kills this guy who is 5 cubits, and they don't even bother to name the guy who was 5 cubits. That was a whole cubit taller than Goliath. You would think that that would have been worthy of at least knowing his name. So I tend to go with, and why would David's nephew then have not been gotten all of, wow, David just killed Goliath. Look at him. Let's praise him. So I'm going to go with the 6 cubits in a span for Goliath and the unnamed Egyptian at his standard. Nobody disagrees with the 5 cubits in a span. Then we have King Og. King Og of Bashan, who was in Moses' day, was considered the remnant of the giants. They called him the remnant, the last of the giants. So what's a cubit? Cubit is typically referred to as the height between, if I were to lay my arm flat, and the tip of my finger, okay? The cubit, what cubit did Moses use? Okay, Moses was trained in all the ways of the Egyptians. Moses would have used the royal Egyptian cubit. The Hebrew cubit at this point didn't exist. It was developed later on during the time span between when they exited and when King Solomon comes in. But they were still using the Egyptian cubit even up to the days of King Solomon because they were still calling it the cubit of the first measure, or the first cubit. So the difference, most Bibles, when you're looking, will tell you that this is the cubit that you should use, the short Hebrew cubit. This is the cubit that you should use to measure Goliath. But in Moses' day, they didn't have this cubit. This cubit did not exist until King Hezekiah in the 700s BC. Moses was around in the 1400s BC. Moses would have been using a cubit of this size. That drastically changes the height of Goliath. That also tells us a little something about the height of Moses and the average height. So remember, the average between here and here. How did we get a foot? 12 inches. Because the standard size of a foot was 12 inches. It is now shrunk, and our standard size of the foot is not 12 inches anymore. But back when that was done, that was the standard size. So if we have, I'll move my little time thing here, nice flat surface. Which cubit does man typically average today? The short one. What does that tell us about Moses? People in Moses' day, on average, were larger than man today. That also means that the heights of Goliath that is in all of your Bibles is actually inaccurate. Big time. Goliath was a much, much bigger person. But let's start with the biggest person in the Bible that we know of, that we're actually given measurements for. That would be King Og. So it says his bedstead. Bedstead is another phrase for sarcophagus, his tomb. They actually would go through and they said, let's go see King Og's sarcophagus. It was a wonder. It was 9 cubits by 4 cubits, which translates as 15 and a half feet by almost 7 feet wide. Wow. Compared to a modern coffin, this would be the difference. Modern coffin, King Og's coffin. You want to know how big King Og was? I need some volunteers. I see some heads there. Right? I cannot find a stand tall enough to actually show you King Og. The tallest one that I can get is Goliath, which if I put Goliath's poster up, you wouldn't be able to see the board. So after we're done the presentation, I'll actually put Goliath up so that you can actually stand next to Goliath and see Goliath's height. But we're going to do King Og, so I need somebody to grab the end there. All right, and then you come hold the front here. There you go. All right, and just back down the aisle. Keep going, keep going, keep going. All right, stop. All right, so I want you to stand on this little black line right there. That little black line right there is the height of King Og's coffin. That's the outer extent. And all the way down at the feet would be the end of where? That was the size of King Og's coffin. Now, coffins would have been pretty much close to the size of the individual. There may have been a 5 to 6 inch difference between the actual height, but that was the coffin. That was the size of the coffin. And don't be afraid to walk on it. You can walk on it if you want. It washes. So the orange line, you'll see the orange line. Right, stop right there. Go back. Go back. A little bit more, a little bit more. Stop. Right there. Nope, down a little more. Down a little more. Right there. So that is the height of the unnamed Egyptian. So the unnamed Egyptian would have been this tall. Most Bibles have Goliath as being down here at the end of this orange band, but we know from the size of cubits that they were using that Goliath was actually up to here. And King Saul, based on today's average size, yeah, based on today's modern average, that would have meant that King Saul would have been up here. But if they were taller in that day, King Saul actually would have been up here, and the average size human would have been more like down to here. But we don't know exactly what their average height was during the time of David. So I estimated just modern. So we'll put modern down there. A head and shoulders taller would have been about 7 feet tall. All right, so exactly what was Goliath's height? 6 cubits in a span, 11 feet, 2 inches tall. Compared to David, who, how old was David?
Teenager.
He was actually maybe past teenager. A lot of people think David was like 13 or 14. David actually, at minimum, was 19, probably closer to his early 20s. And I have a whole explanation for that. So if you want to know more about David, come see me after the program. We can talk about David some more. All right, so where was Goliath from? From the city of Gath. Okay, this is an aerial view of Gath today. Where do you think the boundaries are? Think the boundaries, this road here? Can you see the boundary of the ancient city? Think you got it? Keep that idea in your mind. That's the boundaries of the ancient city that they found so far. And you can see some expansions. So here's what looks like what may have been the original wall, and then they had to expand outward. And you'll see that. Some of the cities, they originally started squares, and then they expanded and they kind of lost their shape. Some cities were designed to sit certain ways for certain rock outcrops so that it could provide protection, because why build a rock wall if you don't have to? So some cities took on a specific design because of the geographic formations.
Has there been a tell is an archaeological dig site?
Well, a tell isn't necessarily an archaeological dig site. It's a mound that has ancient remains inside of it. So this one is Tel as-Safi.
What have they found there?
So that's what we're getting to. So when they dug, all right, so this is a gate. They believe that this is the water gate. So see that individual standing there. This is the one that's possibly mentioned in Samuel, where David killed their guy, and then he goes to the city for protection, and then he thinks, what, maybe this wasn't such a good idea, but he didn't want to offend anybody, so then he's like, how am I going to get out of this? I'm going to go mad. Let me out of here. And they're like, what's up with him? Just get him out, get him out, get him out. And he was clawing at the gate, and this is possibly the gate that he was clawing at. This is a wine press, so they would put their grapes in there, and then they would run their press through there. They've also found pottery. We got pottery here. Here's an altar. These are sling stones. So this was not an uncommon thing that David just randomly had. You know, this slingshot, nobody had ever seen a slingshot before. And speaking of slingshots, here is a slingshot. And then after we're done today, I actually have slingshots if anybody wants to make a slingshot. And I've got marshmallows to use as ammo. No rocks allowed. Marshmallows only, and do not eat them. Yeah, and they can break windows if you're not careful. This is what a Philistine, this is an engraving, this is a copy of an engraving that they found that was from the Philistine region. I'm going to go on this side of the room. So that's an engraving, I believe it was found in Persia from when they were fighting Philistines. So they found all sorts of lovely stuff there. The rocks, see this rock wall? See how big these rocks are? That's not the typical size of building material for that area. The rocks are actually 2 to 3 times the size of the standard area at this particular site. They said it's of note. Aaron Mayer, who is not a Bible-believing scholar, said, wow, we can't figure out why the building stuff here is so much larger than everywhere else. I'm like, I know. All right, so while they were digging there, this is another area where they were digging in the city, they found a fragment from a jar. Has some letters on it. The letters AWLT and the letters WLT, which in the language of the area is actually identical or very, very similar to the name Goliath. Wow. So I'm going to pass this around. So we have a jar fragment from the city of Gath that actually says Goliath. The older walls are like 13 feet wide compared to newer ones, which are 6 feet wide. So much, much wider. The older blocks, huge, 3 to 6 feet compared to newer blocks, which are like 1.5 feet. So that's how you can tell the age of a city. The older the city, sometimes the bigger the blocks, because the people who built them were a little bigger. All right, average area of the city, 123 acres. All right, I did not carry this one in here. It's just too fragile to carry in here. But this is the Chaldean stela. So this is actually the only official mention of King David that we have in archaeology. It's from the time closer to the fall of Israel than it is to David's time, but it talks about defeating somebody of the house of David, and that this is their enemy. So it's talking about a physical individual who is descended. He is listed as a king of a foreign nation who is a descendant of an individual named David, a royal individual named David. This is the only officially recognized piece of the past that actually mentions David. And it's the Chaldean stela. There's a place called Monash where they found a bunch of scaled armor, and they also found similar and not as great of quantities at Gath. But what is particularly noticeable about the armor that they found is that it is way too much for one individual, which is very odd. It's enough, they said, to make suits for 5 individuals. Who would need armor that big, but why would they have 5 individuals, with this particular type of armor? I'm like, maybe because the person was like 5 times the size of everybody else. That would make sense. But they would use chainmail in the Middle Ages. They used these copper scales during the days of Goliath. And then also they have found some axe heads and some spear points at Gath and at Monash. And these spear points are much, much larger. And, I forgot my Roman spear point. So if you go in the back room, you'll see I've got a display with Jesus artifacts on it. There's a Roman spear point. And the Roman spear point is about that big compared to this spear point. Because the whole idea behind a spear is to what? Yeah, you got to stab. So this is attached to a pole. So holding this, it's, already kind of large to hold in my hand. The pole would have been even bigger than this, and I'm supposed to be using this in battle, going like this and, spear pointing. It has to be maneuverable. Something that's this size is not very maneuverable unless you're a much larger individual. So this is actually a replica of the largest one, or one of the largest ones that they've found in the land of Israel.
And they say the shaft is like a weaver's beam.
And the shaft on this would have been, huge. And it would have weighed a lot. It would have weighed, 4 or 5 pounds. And in our battle, 4 or 5 pounds, that's like taking a weight with you, maybe even heavier. All right, there are some other giants in the Bible. They're not specifically called giants. Some of them are, or in this case, they are called giants, but we see them elsewhere not listed as giants. So we have the Emims, which is the name for the Moabites called them, the Zazumans, which is the name that the Amorites called them. We have the Amorites that we are calling somebody else, the Ammonites and the Amorites. So the Ammonites were calling this other group giants. The Amorites actually were giants. And then we have the Raphaims, which the word just means giant or son of the giant. Where do we see these same names? So this is from Deuteronomy. These are some of the groups of people that the Israelites are facing. There's like, we look like ants compared to them. This is also in Amos where it talks about, hey, God destroyed them whose height was like the cedar tree. Cedar trees are known for being very, very tall. Where else do we see these names in the Bible? Not listed as being giants. Go all the way back to Genesis, Sodom and Gomorrah. These are some of the names of the people that when there's that battle that Lot got caught up in the tail end of, the people that are fighting in this battle are listed as giants in Moses' day, but during Abraham and Lot's day, they're not noted as giants. Which means what? Everybody was the same size. They were all the same size. But by the time you get to Moses' day and they're fighting the same people, for some reason, these people, probably through genetics, maintained that giant gene, whereas Moses' people, the Israelites, had gone down into Egypt, been influenced, probably. We know some of them had married in. They had been enslaved, so maybe not the best of foods. And they were not as tall as these individuals. All right, Arba, sons of Arba. These are the sons, the Anak. They were the sons of Arba, and this is the ones who we can't go fight them. We're like little ants compared to them. Arba, where do we see this name? Arba was one of the descendants of Canaan who settled in the land of Canaan. One of his descendants was a guy named Heth. Heth is whom Abraham bought the field, and Abraham was having the dealings with to bury Sarah and eventually everybody else. And they left that area, and when they were chased out by Caleb, who went in and said, I want the home place. I want the family burial yard in Hebron. Chased them out. Where did they go? They went from Hebron, they were living, which is also called Arba. They went to Gath. So the same giants The same enemy that Joshua and Caleb were fighting went from Hebron to Gath, and then by the time David comes along, they're still fighting them. Kirhath Arba is Hebron. That's just a lineage line. There are a bunch of tombs in Hebron. So the Cave of the Patriarchs in Hebron, tourist trap. It's not actually where they were buried, and there's a whole story behind that, but there are a lot of burial chambers in that region because everybody wanted to be buried there. There is one that was found that does have a place carved out inside of it that is, would hold bodies that were 11, 12 feet tall. That's one of the things that they have found in this region. This is a picture of the outside, what it may have looked like. This area here where this person's curled up to show how big that little niche is, that's just where they would have stored all their supplies for the burial chamber. This is one of the entrances. It's buried underground. All of the tombs are underground. That's generally where you put a tomb, underground. But the whole region, when you go back through and you look, there's hundreds of places like this where the bodies have been buried because it was considered a great honor to be buried near the forefathers. And Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah were all buried in Hebron. So everybody wanted to be buried in Hebron. So Hebron's like a big graveyard, big cemetery. Do we have giants today? Somewhat. Here's a giant for you. Tallest man ever recorded, not in the Bible. This is Robert Wadlow. He was just under 9 feet tall. This is him with his family. This is his father. His father is 5'11". To give you an idea, just 3 feet looks like that compared to. So if you were looking in your Bibles and your Bibles say that Goliath was like 9 foot something, this would be how they would be picturing David and Goliath. Goliath was actually 2 feet taller than that. So if you wanted to, that really puts David and Goliath a little bit better in perspective. His hand's the size of the head. This is the tallest man currently alive. His name is Sultan Kosa. And he's 8'3". All right, this is the tallest couple. They were 7 feet, 11 and a half inches. That's not true. That's the official height because he was upset because his wife was taller than him, so he would not let her officially record her actual height. They had to go by his height. So tallest couple in the world was 7 foot, 11 and a half, but actually I believe that she was about 2 to 3 inches taller than him. Cool. All right, if you don't want to see mummified body parts, close your eyes now. This is the official close your eyes warning. All right, you were warned. All right. This is a mummified finger found in Egypt. It is 15 inches long. Oh, wow. The individual who saw this finger, of course, could not purchase this finger. It was a family heirloom of somebody else. But when they saw it, they're like, nobody's going to believe me. Because if you're looking at this, can you tell how big that is? No. So they were really, really smart. What is the one thing that you can always rely on being exact? The size and shape of currency. Governments are very funny about money. They like to make sure that their money is not being counterfeit. So they reached into their billfold and they pulled out an Egyptian dollar. Now the Egyptian dollar measurements, anybody can find anywhere and you can get the exact measurements. So they pulled out an Egyptian dollar and they put it next to the image. They didn't hold it back. They didn't put it, they laid it flat even and took a picture so that you can then go through and say, okay, we know how big the Egyptian dollar is, so now I'm just going to take that and we can get the measurements for the finger. This is what you do when you you get inventive. When you don't have a measuring tool with you, you use something that is not going to change or adjust in size. Because it's like, oh, this thing is the size of Susan's foot. Well, how do I know what size Susan's foot is? Has Susan's foot grown? Has it shrunk? Did it swell? But this is depending on the finger. So if it's pinky finger, the person's going to be a little shorter. If it's the middle finger, they're going to be, taller. If it's an index finger, smaller than that. But it would have belonged to somebody about 15 feet high. 15 feet in height. All right. This is armor from a castle that they've uncovered when they went inside and they're looking at all the armor piles. Armor belonged to somebody about 8.5 feet tall. They've purposely put smaller armor next to it to make the 8.5 foot tall armor seem a lot bigger. But there were people back in the Middle Ages who were quite tall, 8.5 feet tall. They've also found bones in the American West, not over in Mesopotamia, anywhere like that. In the American West, they will find bones that are 3 times the size of modern human bones. And this is just showing all of the different sizes of bones that they have found compared to what a modern bone of that size would look like. This is called Goliath's footprint. It's in South Africa. It's not actually Goliath's footprint, but it is a giant footprint. Now, here's the interesting thing. The type of stone that this is, and I can't remember off the top of my head what the name of this material is, but it's a very hard stone. The only way that you could carve it or make this print would be if it was in almost a molten form or melting. Whoever made this print actually made it while they were running. You can see the upward motion of when they were running and they lift their foot back out of this molten, melting rock. At the point at which the rock face was not up like this. So over time, the area where it was probably like this. It's now been pushed up from below, and now it's up like this. But originally, it was at an angle, and it's now straight up. It's a footprint that is about 3.5 to 4 feet in length. I could never get an actual estimate because people sometimes measure from the mud. You can see where the mud's squished between the toes. Some people measure from the top of the mud to the heel of the foot. Some people actually measure from the toe to the heel. So you have to know which measurement they use. But looking at that, how tall would you say that person was? The footprint itself is 3.5 to 4 feet tall. That would belong to somebody, using our modern ratios, somebody that was between 18 and 24 feet tall. And a lot of people, I lose them right there. They're like, there's no way people were possibly that tall. Well, we've got evidence of people way after the flood who are at least, 15 and 16 feet tall. So during the flood, it's not that far of a stretch for somebody being, 18 feet tall. And I have to put in there the whole calculation of, okay, I can't just say 18 because the calculation ratios say between 18 to 24. So I have to throw that in there. Some people have really big feet, like me. Some people have really small feet, like my mom, and can wear any shoes she wants. But this person wasn't wearing shoes. They were running with a rock that has to be very hot to get into a mushy state. What does that tell you about the flood? Yeah, geothermal activity was going on, and people were running for their lives. So just kind of to recap the different giants that we've covered today, we have our modern people. We have Robert Wadlow. We have Goliath. If we were finding the bodies that belonged in those tombs in Hebron, that's about how big they would be. King Og, the finger that was found, the mummified finger, and then the footprint, and then footprint back to modern. We are like ants compared to them. Now you know why the Israelites were saying we're but ants in their sight. because the people that they were trying to fight were huge. Now, yeah, I've got some more slides, but I think that we're just going to go ahead because we are creeping up on time. I want the kids to be able to do their project. So it is kind of creepy. Okay, fine. I'll move the slide for you. There. That's not so creepy now, is it? Okay. So the remainder of the slides just go through, and it's talking about, Abraham Lincoln is talking about the giant bones that they were finding in the mounds in America. As they were settling and they're plowing the fields, they were finding giant bones all over the place. We're just going to fly through these. They find these huge axes that actually have wear patterns on them. So somebody has used them. To actually comfortably use these things, you'd have to be like 13 feet tall, 12 to 13 feet tall to use these axes and hammers. You have these giant swords that are found all around the world that are absolutely humongous. This one is from Big Pierre, otherwise known as Big Peter, and he was a rather large dude. This is a crown that a gentleman down in Ecuador, he would give gifts of clothing and food and blankets to the natives there and made sure that they were okay, got them medicine. They knew he liked archaeology, so they started bringing him artifacts from South America. And so these are some of the artifacts that they brought him. He had a whole huge museum that when he died, the Vatican came in and took it back to Vatican City. This is a Viking boat, a Viking ship. The remains of it once held a person that was about 9 feet tall. The pyramid blocks, if this photo is to scale of an individual lifting the blocks, this is a person standing next to said blocks. Yeah. Yeah, they were a lot bigger. This is upward, going closer to, the mixing of the different heights. Some people are still taller, some people are smaller, and so we're going through this shift where there's still giants walking around while there's people that are of a shorter stature. Same thing here. These are not children because children are actually shown up top. Children in ancient Egypt drawings did not wear clothing. So we know that these are not children. Wow. Those are giants. And again, we've got more giants. The reason I brought this one in here, it shows, the varying heights of people. King Narmer was probably a giant. And we'll talk about him later today. I like this one in particular. Because the lion has a full beard, full mane. Lions don't get that full mane until they're fully grown, when they're 3 years old. So this is a full-grown lion. We know how tall lions on average are. Lions about, I think, 3.5 feet. You can get the measurements. Ostriches are 9 to 11 feet tall. These are not baby animals. These are actual full-grown animals, and that would make all of the people in this photo somewhere between 9 and 11 feet tall. Then the dagger of Ehud, they didn't see that one because Ehud was much bigger. And then these are mace heads. So you put the rock on the end, and you would put on your side for battle. And if the enemy got close enough for you to reach, you'd take that and you go like this. But you're not doing that all the time. You're fighting with other things. This is a last resort. So average size, 1 inch, 2 inches, maybe 3 overall. The one that they found for King Narmer on the Narmer palette. Here he is. He's holding his mace. We have the mace head. Any guesses on what size the mace head is? 9.8 inches. on the side of your hip during the middle of battle. A 10-inch mace head. That shows you that these people were huge. They weren't just walking around with a 10-inch mace head in the middle of battle. They couldn't even hardly move. You know, you go to swing and that mace head goes around and, whoops, knocked you out. Sorry, buddy. No, they were pretty big people. And this is a picture of the mace head. On display. They'll always say ceremonial. If they don't know what it's for, it's either religious or it's ceremonial. All right, and then this is a close-up view of what's up here on the armor palette, which I'll put on display in the back. And then finally, just for examples, these are not real bones. These are not real skeletons, but they are representative of what if somebody was, 23 feet tall. This is compared to a modern human. The femur bone itself would be the size of a modern human. This one also, same thing. So there is evidence of giants. Sometimes because of the nature of them being so large, they're not even thinking, oh, is this a human bone, and misidentifying it as something else. So there is evidence. They've been uncovering it for years. They just don't always recognize what they have. And if they do recognize what they have, they purposely try to downplay it because they don't want the Bible to be real. But the evidence is there. All right. So we will go ahead and close out with final prayer. And then I guess we will dismiss into the fellowship hall. I do have some crafts that will be available, and then we will reconvene for this program this afternoon at 2:30, but I will be available for questions if anybody wants to look at something closer up or just have a general question. I will be here to answer those. So bow your heads. Dear Lord, we come again to you to thank you for everything that you have done for us today, for allowing the computer